Jeff Gibbons here with another Maschine tutorial, and in this one I'm going to take you into a little bit further depths of music theory that I feel is important for any musician to know. And I've got a recent video on music theory that deals with notes, so if you haven't watched that, make sure you watch that one. I'll put a link to that in the description, as well as one that talks about rhythm. But in this one we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about chords. And there are ways that classically trained or jazz musicians think about chords. And if you're new to music theory, it'll be helpful for you to start thinking in these ways as well. So first off, I should mention that I'm using a program called Midiculous that's put out by Gospel Musicians LLC. There's the little free player. I'm just going to use that so we can see the notes that I am playing. We've already talked about the notes. We've got C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. That's the notes of the C major scale. So let's talk about the chords and the names that we give these chords. So if you are in a major key, every single scale degree gets its own chord. So C major is the 1 chord. So we call that the 1 chord. Classical musicians and jazz musicians will give these chord numbers Roman numerals. So we think in terms of Roman numerals so that you could play in the key of C, or you could apply it to a totally different key, and you would still know what chord to go to based on the Roman numerals. So that's what we end up doing, thinking about these chords as numbers. So if I play this chord in the key of C, it's the 1 chord. We move on to the 2 chord, the next scale degree, and we get a minor chord. So the first chord is major, the 1 chord's major, the 2 chord is minor, 3 chord is minor, 4 chord is major, 5 chord is major, 6 chord is minor, and then the 7 chord is a special chord. It's a diminished chord. It sounds sad like a minor chord. This would be a minor chord, but with a diminished chord we lower the 5th. If you were to play, it sounds like kind of like an old black and white movie where the girl's about to get run over by the train, you know? So the 7 chord is a special chord in the major key. And it has that diminished sound, not used that often in pop music, so maybe one that you can forget about for now, but it definitely adds some color. So we won't worry about the diminished chord so much right now. But the most important chords to understand are the 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord. Those are the 3 major chords. And then we've got the minor chords. The 2, the 3, and the 6. So in pop music, the most popular chords are the 1, the 4, the 5, and the 6. So you see those YouTube videos where they make fun of all the songs that have the same chord progression in them, you know, like the 1, the 5, the 6, and the 4. That is a very common progression, and a bazillion songs have been made with those chords, so that's why I guess it is so easy to make those videos where you show all the songs that have those chords in them. And we could do this 1, 4, 5, 1. We can do that in any key. The problem is on the piano is that you have to learn which chords have which black keys. So after you get out of the key of C major, you start having to think about the black keys. So let's look at, say, the key of A. So there's the 1 chord, there's the 5, there's the 6, and there's the 4. 1, 5, 6, 4. So once you start understanding the fact that you've got these Roman numerals, which chords are major in a major key, which chords are minor, then you can start to learn to play in these different keys and very quickly think, okay, I'm going to go to the 5 chord, I'm going to go to the 6 chord, or whatever. So over on Maschine, when you hit chords mode, the first thing you're going to get is major chords. So when I play 1 pad, I get 1, 3, and 5. Not quite as self-explanatory when you're looking at this chromatic scale. Remember, a chromatic scale is just all of the notes in sequence, so white, and they go up 1 step. So if we watch it on the pads, we can see going through the chromatic scale. Let's go back to keyboard mode for a second. So, go back to chords mode, and now since we are trying to break this down and simplify this, let's just take this off of the chromatic scale and put it to the major scale. So I take that over to major, and now if I go to keyboard mode, I'm in C major playing all the white notes. I could switch to a totally different key by going down a few semitones. So now I'm in B flat. B flat major. Much easier than playing in B flat on a keyboard if you're not a keyboardist. So let's go back to C major for a second. And we've got it on major. I set it to chords. Now we're still on the major scale, but now I've got my 1 chord, my 2 chord, 3 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, which is major, 6 chord, which is minor, 7 chord, there's that diminished chord, and then we're back to the 1, or the tonic. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what was that common chord progression in major keys? It's going to be 1, 5, 6, 4. So let's just record that in here. So what can we do to make this a little bit less, heart and soul? Select the notes and then go Shift Pad 15 and it takes it down an octave. And then I'm going to take these notes right here and these notes right here and shift them down the octave. Octave down, and then maybe these ones as well, octave down, and then these ones also down an octave. So all I've done is taken the chords I played in chord mode and shifted some of them down the octave so that the chords look in closer position. It's going to sound a little bit better. So already sounds a little bit more interesting. Obviously this is very basic, but that gives you an idea of what you can do with the chords mode and then how you can shift things around in the software so it doesn't sound like you're jumping around like a beginner pianist would do. So up till now I've been talking about major keys and the Roman numerals for major keys. The same thing applies to minor keys. When we're working on a song or listening to a song, what does it feel like? Does it feel like a happy major song, or does it feel darker, like a little bit sad? And then you'd probably guess that it's a minor song, and you could think of the chords in terms of a minor key. So there's A minor. Now let's look at the chords, the Roman numerals for the chords of the key of A minor. This is where things get a little more confusing. So the A minor chord is the 1 chord, small I. The 2 chord in A minor is diminished. Kind of reminds you of the 7 chord, doesn't it? Then we've got the 3 chord, which is major. 3 uppercase I's for the 3 chord. The 4 chord is minor. The 5 chord is minor as well. But minor keys are a little bit different from major keys. When we go to the 5 chord, we can raise it up and we get this major sounding 5 chord. All you have to do on the 5 chord to make it major is raise the 3rd. So we got 1, 4, 5, 1. And that sounds very complete. You know, the 1 chord, the 5 chord, making it major, it just seems kind of stronger. Might remind you of like some Christmas songs. So try it out, but you're going to find that a lot of songs in the sort of hip-hop genre will definitely work better without that major sounding 5 chord. So you could do the same thing without the major sounding 5 chord. So we got 1, 4, 5, 1. So that's the 5 chord. It can be minor or major, and we would write it small v for minor, uppercase V for major. Then we got the 6 chord, major, 7 chord major, and then we're back to the 1 chord. So let's have a look at a minor key for a second. So let's delete all those, go over to the chord type and go to minor. So I'm in the key of C minor now. And before I was talking about A minor, which was just the white notes, well, C minor is much more complicated. It's got 3 flats in it. So learning that on the piano takes some doing, you know, or years of practice and stuff like that. So on Maschine, it's beautiful. We've set it to C minor. And it's just ready for us, right? Which is great. Go to chords mode, and now I've got the 1 chord, the 2 chord, which is diminished. Remember that one? Sounds diminished. It sounds very different from a minor chord. We've got the 3 chord, which is major. Sounds happy. 4 chord is minor. 5 chord. This is the 5 chord when it is minor. There's the 6 chord, which is major. 7 chord, major. And back to the 1 chord. So let's take this down an octave. So really common. The 1 chord, the 6 chord, and the 7 chord when you're in a minor key, very, very common. A million songs made with just 1 and 6. That's it. I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, but it's true. Put this in as well, our slow tune. All right, so some basic chords in there. What could you, as a non-musician, do with this to then take this and make this more interesting? The first thing I'd recommend doing is putting this onto another track. And then we're going to turn that into a bass track. Okay, you could always just copy and paste the information from one to another. So all I'm going to do here is take this group, I'm going to option drag it over to make a copy, or alt drag on a PC. And now that I've got that group over there, I am going to go get rid of all of the upper notes so that I've got a bass line. There we go. So then with this one, I'm going to take it, select it, hold Shift, octave down, take it down the octave, and then now, you know, find some kind of bass instrument for this track right here. So now I've got the bass line taken from the chords part. I shifted it up an octave, it sounded better. And then I've got my chords right here, which I can then play around with a little, and then we can see if changing things out of root position makes this more interesting. So I could take maybe all of these notes right here and go shift down the octave. Let's see what that sounds like. So already it sounds kind of better. It's just, we've got something different happening than just root position chords. That gets really boring after a while. So if anything from this tutorial, if I've shown you to start changing up your chord positions, that's going to really help. And what we're doing there is we're inverting the chord. It's called an inversion. So anytime you have a chord that's not in root position, it's an inverted chord. All right, so there we've got the 1 chord, we've got the 6 chord, we've got the 7 chord, and at the end we've got the 5 chord. And remember I said before the 5 chord could be major or minor. What happens if we take this note right here and just move it up 1 semitone, shift up 1 semitone on the machine, and then let's listen to what that sounds like right there. So it has a kind of more final sound. Listen to it again. And now listen to it minor. Undo that. So there it is minor. And then redo it, hear it major one more time. So that note adds some tension. We have these Roman numeral names, the 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 3 chord, the 4 chord, etc. But we also use regular numbers to specify which note of the chord you're playing. Like this, we call this the 1, here's 2, we call that the 3, and then the 5. So 1, 3, 5 of the C chord. So we take a chord and we add a seventh to it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sounds almost loungy, doesn't it, right? You get this kind of you do a couple of major 7 chords in different positions, and all of a sudden it's like, ooh, you get like some Jamiroquai action or something like that. If you tried adding major 7s into some of the pop songs that you love or rock songs you love, you'd be like, oh, what is going on? This sounds so wrong, right? But certain genres of music, it's perfect. We can also do a major 7 chord on the 4 chord. So we go to the 4 chord, which is an F major, and we add a 7 there, and that sounds really nice too. So let's listen to starting to sound like a 80s sitcom or something, isn't it? So the 4 chord, add the 7, you've got the major 7 in there. Sounds a little bit jazzy, but in certain contexts it works perfectly. And then we've got the 5 chord, which adds the 7, and that is called a dominant 7th chord. So dominant 7th, this note right here, sounds very different from this major 7 chord. If we were to make this a dominant 7th, it would sound like this. Starting to sound kind of bluesy. So the dominant 7th chord has a very bluesy quality to it. This dominant chord has a really strong pull to the 1 chord. So that's what the dominant adding the 7th does, is it adds more tension. And music's all about, you know, tension and release, right? So if we look at this, we've got tension, release. So this chord can go, that tension can resolve to that 1 chord. Next one, we've got the 6 chord, which would have just a nice minor 7 up top. And then the diminished chord, that one gets a little more complicated because we can add a regular 7th up top, or we can add a diminished 7th. Now you're really getting into that black and white movie with the train and the girl about to get run over. Right? Diminished chord, diminished 7th, adds even more tension. So that's adding 7ths. And again, the thing that you want to try to do is not play all of your chords in root position. So if I want to go to the 4 chord, I can start like this. Go to the 4 chord, let's just like that. Now let's go to the 5 chord. All I'm doing is playing all of the notes of the root position 7th chord, and then I'm going to this chord, but I'm just taking these top notes and moving them down here. Here's the 1 chord again, and here's the 4 chord, and here's the 5 chord. So you see how I can keep my hand in such close position as I move around with these 7ths. Go over to Maschine, I'm in chords mode, and I'm going to go minor, and I'm going to add a 7th. So I just jump over to a 7 right there. And then now when I play the chords, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. We can see 4 notes playing. And if we were to look on the keyboard, we'd see C, E flat, G, and B flat. So that is a minor 7 chord. We don't even need to worry about necessarily what notes they are if we're using the chord mode on a Maschine. So there's the 1. Let's go to the 4 chord. Also with a 7th. Let's go to the 5 chord. 6, 7, 1. Now this is where it really starts to sound funny if you leave everything in root position. But let's try a similar progression to what I just did, but with the 7ths. Here we go. Okay, so let's quantize that. I'm just going to get rid of this one little chunk here. All right, so now we've got 7th chords in root position. which also don't sound great if that's all you're doing. So what we can do is do things like take the 7th down the octave. If we do that, we're letting the bass do the root of the chord. And instead of having the 7th on the top, we're now going to have the 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to have that on the top. Might sound cool. Try other things. Take another note and shift it down the octave and see what that does. Gets things a little crunchier. And again, we've got our 5 chord right here. If we want to make it major, make it that dominant 7th chord, then what we do is we take the 3rd scale degree of that chord and we raise it 1 semitone, shift 1 semitone. And then now we get a dominant 7th chord there. So that's playing around with the 7ths, shifting notes around, using Maschine to shift notes around. So what you can do now is start listening to other tunes and see if you can figure out whether they're major or minor, and also figure out what key they're in. That will then also apply to you importing samples into Maschine and trying to figure out what key it's in if you don't have an idea. So hopefully this was useful for you. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and the bell, and stay tuned for more videos.